what we're looking at here along this array of things is a difference between less risky, right? Because with my savings, what can someone do? They can't really, they can rob it from me, but in terms of legal ways, my savings is very safe. While it doesn't have a big upside in terms of gaining interest and that sort of thing, it's mine, and no one is going to take that away from me. It's mine. I don't have to repay it. It's there. So that is the most risk-free. So the most vulnerable, so when we're talking about the most economically vulnerable populations, they are low-risk seeking. So oftentimes if we see in some very poor countries, what will actually happen is people will pay for someone to come by their house and collect their savings. So has anybody heard of negative interest on savings? So like that's the same, when something happens, say for example in the banks, when they say, well, the prime rate is this, or we're paying this, we're paying 3% rate. Well, that would be the equivalent of the bank coming to you and saying, you know what, Linda, we want you to take out a mortgage, and you know what, we're going to pay you 8% on your mortgage. We're going to pay you this money additionally to you, just so that you have the money so we don't spend it. Does that sound crazy to anybody? Am I the only person that sounds crazy to? That you would pay somebody to come to your house and save your money for you? But the situation is that there's very little access to these low-risk ability or options to save. So where do you save? Well, some of the places that we talked about. But when we talk about more high-risk things, just as we said earlier, how many of us have credit cards? How many of us have savings accounts? How many of us have checking accounts, right? Almost everyone raised their hand. But then we said, well, how many of us have actually taken out a loan to start a business? Well, none of us. Well, one, maybe two, or some others. But the idea is that it's a very small percentage of people that are really seeking that type of risk. Well, what happens if we start a big business, or if we start a business? What's the upside potential? It's big. Are we asleep? Do we need to get up and do a little icebreaker or something? Or are we doing good? Profit, right? And it's big. If we take a big risk, that's the whole idea of Wall Street, right? You got these risk-return things. So if we take a big risk, that means then we're going to have a big opportunity to make some money at the end. Well, guess what happens when you have low risk? Well, you don't have that opportunity to make that big money, but you don't have that risk either. So when we think about what, just as our colleague in the back said, what's your name, excuse me? Ben. Just as Ben said, it's very important, if you're a poor or economically vulnerable person, if you're thinking about where I'm going to eat tomorrow or when I'm going to eat this evening, where is that money going to come from, you're probably not thinking about very high-risk things. What do you want to know how to do? You want to know how to smooth your income so that when you have a lot or a little bit of excess today, that tomorrow you can have that excess saved and be able to pay for whether it's your education, just these things. So the idea that this graph wants to show is the difference between high-risk and low-risk ventures. In this case, this is a graph from Uganda where the poor save their money. So if we look, there's about 90%, and this is in terms of actual where I'm going to actually deposit this money. So 50% say they don't. 50% does not have savings. We've got another 13% with other, 17% in informal groups. So what does that mean? What does an informal group mean? Well, it means that a few of us get together and we pool our resources, and from there we give ourselves loans or we manage our finances. These are things that the people have come up with that are very actually interesting. Bank of Uganda in this case was 15%. SACCOs, which is a different form of this community microfinance. But look at this aspect right here. Microfinance NGOs were only 2%. Please go. No. They just said the last person has to invite everybody else to dinner, so I don't know if that's true. No. So the point of this graph right here, we're talking about microfinance. No. The point of this graph is to show that out of 100%, or out of this this huge country, only 2%, are y'all seeing that right there? Only 2% right here have access to financial services through microfinance organizations. So what does that tell us? That there is 98%, and I'm about to get excited in here, there's 98% that don't have access, that want to save, whether it's this group here that doesn't have any access to save, whether it's this group right here, the others, there's 98% of the people that don't have this opportunity. Well, if you come to the United States and talk about how many of us have access to formal banking or informal banking, it's a much higher percentage. So, and the idea is not to compare Uganda with the United States by any means, but the idea is to say, ladies and gentlemen, 2%. There's a huge market niche out there for whether it's microfinance NGOs, whether it's for you guys and some of the work that you're doing that sounds like the Kiva is very interesting, but there is a huge opportunity out there. So this is just to show that. Okay, so just as we were talking about, why do people save? Why do the economically vulnerable, why do poor people save? Well, one of the reasons, obviously, basic household needs such as food, clothing, health services, that type of thing. We're saving because we know tomorrow we have to eat. We're saving because, you know, we're going to keep this, the equivalent to $25 or $30, you know, in between the boards, because we know, you know, that one day someone in the family might get sick and we'll have to take them to the hospital. Well, how do we do that? Well, we either have a little savings or we have to go to the money lender. Actually, in Colombia, I'll digress and tell this one little story. So I was talking with this lady in Colombia, similar type conversation as I shared about the woman in Guatemala. And I get to talking with her and I say, well, ma'am, what do you do when you need a few dollars, say the equivalent to 20 US? And she's like, well, the FARC, Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, narco-traffickers, they have money. Imagine that. Drugs pay them. So they have money. So where does she go when she needs this money? Well, she goes to the guy who works for the FARC and goes and says, you know, I need 20, 50, 60, whatever the amount is. And she goes, no paperwork at all. She doesn't sign her name. All he does, takes the money out of his pocket. Here. The terms are known. It's no issue. So I said, well, that sounds amazing. And she's like, well, and this is from her mouth. She's like, well, the bad part is, and this is what I asked. I said, well, you know, kind of imagining the loan shark problem here in the United States. I said, well, what happens if you don't pay? She's like, well, I'll tell you what happened to me. She said for $3 US, which is about 6,000 pesos, which is not that much money here, or not that much money there, and even less here, but a relatively insignificant amount of money. The gentleman came to her house, insulted her, pushed her down on the floor, kicked her son, you know, swept him out of the way for $3. So what's that tell us? That tells us, however I can go back. Yeah, there we go. That tells us that this 2% right here is not being treated that way, right? If you don't pay Kiva back, Kiva doesn't come up to you and push you down and kick you and do that sort of thing. Yes, go ahead.
So are loan sharks included in your other then, or where are they included?
They would be in other in this situation, in this particular area.